Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. This time, we're tackling accents and dialects.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, we found this awesome article. It's from Duolingo, and it's called Dialect versus Accent. What's the difference? And I think it's really interesting because we all know, right? We all have them.
Right.
What's the real difference?
Yeah, it's a question I get a lot. People often think they can choose to have an accent or a dialect. But the
Oh,
truth is, we all speak with both an accent and a dialect, and they really tell a story about who you are, where you're from, your background.
wow, I like that. It's like your own personal,
Yeah.
like linguistic fingerprint.
It is, it is. And it goes even deeper than that because we actually often modify our speech
Really?
depending on who we're talking to.
Oh, yeah.
That's something called code switching, where you might speak more formally at work and then use more slang or colloquialisms with your friends.
I totally do that. I didn't even realize that was a thing.
It is.
So, okay, so we all have them, but what's the like core difference?
Well, the simplest way to think about it is that an accent is just about your pronunciation, how you sound when you speak.
Okay.
But dialect is much broader. It includes pronunciation, but it also includes things like the words you use, your vocabulary, your grammar, and even some of the social customs around language.
So it's like one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah,
Accent is one piece and dialect is the whole.
exactly.
Okay, got it, got it.
Yeah.
And the Duolingo article had some really interesting examples like how
Yeah,
zucchini versus courgette. Like that's the same vegetable,
right.
but totally different.
Exactly. Same veggie, different dialect.
Different dialect.
And even things like grammar, do you have any tea
Hmm.
versus have you any tea? It's just a subtle grammatical difference that
Wow.
reveals a dialect difference.
That is really interesting. Okay, now what I find so interesting, and they mention this in the article too, is how dialects form. Like how did they even come about? And they kind of compared it to this giant game of telephone,
Yeah.
where like one little
Very
change
good.
leads to another, and then suddenly you have this whole other way of speaking.
And it's a really good analogy because dialects are formed through this process called divergence.
Hmm.
And it's where these small changes over time, sometimes caused by geographical isolation or sometimes by social isolation,
Oh, wow.
start to add up. And eventually, those dialects, they can even become completely separate languages. Like, think about the Romance languages. Spanish, French, Italian, they all came from different dialects of Latin.
So they're like branches on a language family tree.
Exactly.
Okay, wow, that's super interesting. So we've established we all have them, but then there are all these like misconceptions.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
There are.
About what's good, what's bad, what's better, what's worse. So what are some of the things that we need to bust right away?
I think one of the biggest ones is this idea that some accents are just inherently better or easier to understand.
Oh, yeah, totally.
But the reality is it really just depends on what you're used to hearing, what your ear is accustomed to.
Oh, 100%. When I moved to a new city, it took me months before I could like understand what anybody was
It
saying.
was just a matter of exposure.
But then eventually I was like, oh yeah, I get it now.
Yeah.
So, okay, what else? What else is a big myth?
Another big one is this idea of a standard accent. Like, we often associate certain accents with prestige or authority,
Right.
but that really has more to do with social power dynamics than any kind of actual linguistic superiority.
Yeah.
And even what we think of as a standard accent can change over time.
Right. Didn't they say Queen Elizabeth's speeches changed during her reign?
Exactly.
Wow.
And our accents are never static,
Yeah, that's true.
They're constantly adapting.
So we're kind of like linguistic chameleons in a way.
We are.
Oh, I like that. You know what's wild? I didn't realize that sign languages have accents too.
Oh, yeah.
It blew my mind.
That's a great point. It just shows you that this whole idea of accent,
Yeah.
it applies to any language system, whether it's spoken or signed.
Wow.
So in sign languages, the accents show up in the different hand shapes people use,
Wow.
the movements, the orientation of their hands. It's the same idea.
It's just expressed differently.
Exactly.
That is so cool. Okay, this is already making me rethink my own accent. Like, what does mine say about me?
Right. And where you're from and who you've met.
I know. It's like I'm looking at it in a whole new way.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to dig a little deeper now into how these things actually form.
Okay.
Like the article mentioned that language, any shared culture, really,
Yeah.
is always like shaped by the environment that it's in.
Exactly. And who we interact with, what media we consume, it's always evolving and adapting.
It's like fashion or music or anything like that.
It is, yeah.
And don't we kind of gravitate towards sounding like the people that we want to identify with?
Yeah, there's this subconscious desire to fit in, to
Yeah.
belong.
Right.
And that can come through in your language and your accent.
And it's like that telephone analogy, right? Just have one tiny change.
Yeah.
Boom, whole other way of speaking.
And it happens so gradually.
Right.
Sometimes we don't even realize it's happening.
So it's not like random changes coming out of nowhere.
No, it's often influenced by things like migration patterns, political boundaries, social classes, all these factors. Imagine a group of people who migrate to a new area.
Yeah.
They bring their dialect with them.
Right.
And inevitably, it starts to mix
Right.
with the languages that are already there.
It's like a melting pot.
It is.
That is wild. It's like I'm seeing language in a whole new dimension.
It's not just words and grammar on a page. It's living and breathing. It's evolving. It's full of history and culture.
I know. Okay, one last myth to bust before we move on.
Okay.
This idea that that standard accents are more logical or correct.
Yes.
The article really highlighted that that's not true.
Yeah, it really comes down to who has historically held power and influence.
Right.
And what they deem to be the standard.
Yeah, like newscasters,
Right.
politicians, like they all adopt this certain way of speaking that's supposed to be like neutral and authoritative.
Exactly.
But it doesn't make everybody else's like bad or wrong.
Not at all. They're all equally valid and expressive.
I love it. This has been such a mind-blowing conversation so far.
Me too. And we've only just scratched the surface.
I know. There's so much more to talk about.
So much more.
So we talked about some of those big myths, but I'm thinking about the differences between accents in different languages. Like the article talked about how some languages have certain sounds, like where the variation really pops up.
Yeah, those are like the hot spots for accent differences. Like in English, vowel sounds are often a big giveaway.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like tomato versus tomato.
Exactly. Same word, different vowel, instant accent cue.
But they said in Spanish it's more about the consonants.
Right, like the th sound for Z or C in some dialects.
And then there's that Argentinian shish sound.
It all comes down to the phonology, the language's sound system, and where those variations tend to cluster.
It's like those hotspots could be clues to how the language changed over time, right?
Exactly. And it's a reminder that accents aren't static, they're always evolving.
Wait, so even if we think we have a neutral accent, we're still picking up bits from people around us.
All the time. It's subconscious, but we're constantly adapting.
Like how you pick up slang from your friends.
Yeah.
It's the same with accents. Wow, language is way more dynamic than I realized. Okay, let's talk about something a little heavier, like how accents and dialects can impact how people see each other.
Definitely. Even though they're just natural variations, they can become tied to social status, where you're from, and even prejudice.
Ugh, yeah. Some accents get linked to being smart or sophisticated, and others get unfair stereotypes. I've definitely been judged for mine before.
It's really important to remember that language isn't just about communication. It's wrapped up in all these social dynamics and power structures.
Totally. We need to fight those biases. Accents and dialects should be celebrated, not used to discriminate. You know, honestly, growing up, I was kind of embarrassed by my dialect.
A lot of people feel that way, unfortunately. But your accent is part of who you are, your history, your identity.
That's a great way to put it. It's like reclaiming your linguistic heritage. Okay, last thing that really struck me. The article said some dialects are actually disappearing. What's causing that?
It's complex. Globalization, media, migration, even government policies can play a role. Sometimes it's a natural evolution, like communities blending together.
So it's like dialects merging or becoming less distinct over time?
Exactly. But sometimes it's more deliberate, like efforts to suppress certain ways of speaking for political reasons.
That's scary. It's like we need to protect linguistic diversity, just like we protect endangered species.
Couldn't agree more.
This is really making me think. We've busted myths, learned the science, and dug into the social side of things. It's been incredible.
We've only just scratched the surface. There's still so much to explore.
I don't know, it makes you think about language differently. It's not just words. It's like who we are as people, our whole background.
Yeah, it really is. And as we wrap up, I keep thinking back to something the Duolingo article said. It asked how we think about our own way of speaking now that we've learned all this.
That's a good question. I think I'll definitely be paying more attention, like listening to myself and to other people differently now.
I hope so. Because every time we hear it a different accent or dialect, it's a chance to, learn something new, It's about understanding people better and just appreciating how cool language is.
Yeah, it's so true. This whole deep dive has just been amazing.